welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this conversation as part of Mutant Promise, their series at Somerset House Studios, now taking place online. My name is Louise O'Kelly. I'm the founding director and curator of Block Universe, which is London's leading performance art festival and commissioning body that normally happens every May in venues across London, as well as international projects abroad, and this year actually online. We held our virtual sessions program. I'm really delighted to be in conversation today with EightOS, which is the overarching project name. There's a collaboration between Dmitry here and NSDOS, who I'll be chatting with. And of course, you'll be seeing this the virtual hubs that we're a part of as well, where both Dmitry and NSDOS are inhabiting in virtual space. I thought I'd start off a bit with perhaps both of you can also introduce yourselves. I'm really curious to hear about how you both first met actually and how EightOS came into being. I'd like to go into a little bit of the background of each of you as your individual practices, and then we can talk a little bit more in depth about EightOS and your practice and what you're currently working on. So, Dmitry, would you like to start?
Yeah.
Where in the world are you right now? And why don't you tell us a little bit more about how this project came into being and how you first met, actually?
Yeah. So right now I'm in Berlin, and originally I'm from Moscow, and most of the time I'm in different places. And with this project we actually started because I think we both had interest to dance, martial arts, digital art, music, and at some point our friends in Paris, they introduced us, and we talked, and we realized that we have a lot of interests in common, especially the idea of movement as a sort of practice and as a way of understanding the world in a different way. And also this idea of how you can get inspired by your body to actually create things and to resonate with the universe in a way. So then we started practicing together. Who told me about this martial art called Sistema, which is a Russian martial art, which I only saw on the internet before, and I thought it was something esoteric. And then I started practicing it, and he had been practicing it already at that point. And then we started connecting it with our dance practice and with music. And at some point, we decided that it should have a name, and we decided to call it EightOS because of this movement of an eight, like a wave inside, and OS for open source operating system.
Okay, amazing. And I think it'd be really interesting because I think people might be curious to hear about your background as well in Berlin and the Berlin dance scene, because I understand that this has been pretty formative in your practice, both kind of as a mover, as someone who creates EightOS, and also with music and technology. So I wondered if you wanted to tell us a bit more about what brought you to Berlin in the first place, and actually kind of what those formative experiences were for you there.
Yeah. So what brought me here, I think, is that the moment I stepped on the Berlin soil, I had a very comfortable feeling that it felt like home. Even though I was outside, it felt like I'm in my house, and I loved the city since then. And then I got involved into a performance scene, dance scene. I've been doing theater before, and but I was always interested in how you can apply this dance movement experience into real life. So what implications it has when you go out of a performance or from a dance class. You know, for me it was most interesting what happens actually after you finish practicing, how you have the echo of movement in your perception of the world. So you come out from a dance class, for instance, and then you start interacting with people or with environment and how it affects you differently, how you open up some channels of perceptions that you didn't have before. And this is kind of like how I started exploring that. and of course also influenced by all these things from Stanislavski's system, open theater as well. Joseph Chaikin, he wrote a book on theater in real life, for instance, that was really interesting for me as well. And then at the same time, I was also working on digital stuff, developing software to stimulate creative thinking, let's say, the ability to look into things that are not visible on the surface through networks and connections, which was also largely inspired by a movement practice I was doing called Noguchi Taiso, which is a Japanese version of Alexander technique. And it's used a lot by Buto dancers as the movement formation. And then it kind of like, it all felt really disconnected up to a certain point, you know, the dance, the physical practice, the digital stuff, the music that I've been working on. But then I started to notice that there were some points of connection between them. And I think the main one was this idea of the wave, of a fluctuation as like the main element of anything that I could perceive, even if you think about it, like sounds are made from waves, visuals, also the cycles of how the seasons happen, the world goes around. You know, there's always this cyclical movement, and somehow aesthetically I was really drawn to it from the point of view of movement and also research. In networks, when you study networks, there's a lot about propagation, and that also happens in waves. So then I kind of like got really involved into that, and then organically it all started to come together into this practice that we call EightOS.
Amazing. That's a really great introduction. Thank you. And I thought NSDOS as well, it would be really fantastic if you could also, I mean, you're obviously virtually within the hubs, like giving everyone, I think, a good perspective of what's happening there. But can you tell us where you physically are right now as well, and a bit more about your background?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in Paris right now. My background, I'm starting to dance. I used to study hip-hop dance, classical contemporary dance. And then I was a bit frustrated with the music I was dancing on, and I wanted to push a bit the relationship with movement and interpretation. So I started to study dance and music, and dance and new technology, because I had this fantasy to connect like movement to music. So for this, I had to learn a bit of technology and coding. So I came in Berlin, I think 7 years ago, to go more deep on this practice, because I heard some people say, yeah, you should go to Berlin because there are a lot of people, they mixing stuff. So you're gonna find like some people are gonna help you to develop your project. So yeah, and also I was in love with this Buto art, and I know like many Japanese was in Berlin for study Buto actually and teach. So for me it was like the I would say like the starting point of this practice mixing technology and dance, because for me Berlin was a bit like this. Yes.
Okay. And for those people who aren't familiar with Buto, because I know both of you have mentioned a number of different movement practices, maybe you could break down a little for those who aren't familiar with that, what the defining principles of that are and how that informs what you do.
Buto basically is a form of art born after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It was like this kind of like a manifesto about like what's gonna stay after like all this atomic bomb, and it was really like I would say like a way to say gravity is the only stuff stay in this earth after each catastrophe. It is anything can disappear, but gravity stay. So this is the main principle. The people who was teaching me Buto, they say about Buto, without all the history about the I would say the first people doing Buto, but really playing with this idea of graffiti. What we have also in EightOS, what we took from this art, and also the way to work with elements in terms of architecture, space, the relationship with nature, the relationship also with our home-like boundaries in life. And yeah, this is for me like what I can define like Buto actually.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So in terms of, I mean, you know, unfortunately, of course, like people cannot physically experience, you know, 8OS at the moment in terms of maybe what was initially visioned to take place at Somerset House. But if someone was to attend an 8OS event, what can you break down? I mean, I think, you know, it would be really useful for people to understand what that relationship is to music, to technology, to movement, and all of these different movement practices that you've referenced, because I feel like my understanding of 8OS is it's very holistic language that the two of you have developed with each other, and it's a practice that you like to share with others as a way of explaining a perspective on the world somehow. So if someone was to experience an 8OS session, how would you describe that? How would you lead us through it?
Actually, the funny thing is like mostly we take the people to come with us. You know, it's like there are some people they want to experience because they hear about this, but sometimes it's like we have a group of friends. We talk about like technology. And from technology, we do like an analogy with movement. So we explain like what is difficult to explain. You know, like we translate. I would say explanation. So this is our way. So if you go to 8OS session, we're gonna start with like a really specific way to talk, really close to like computer science actually. And we're gonna embody all these concepts. So we're gonna do like a physical exercise with music, and we're gonna try to synchronize with the breathing system, walk, dance, sound all together, and start to build like a system and a language also. So this is, I would say, what you have to expect is like you have to expect to be encrypted with a new way of seeing things, feeling things, and reproduce things.
And
Much.
how important is it to you both to foreground the scientific approach and scientific language with that somatic approach and the embodied experience?
Dimi, you want to?
Yeah. So actually, we have here on the screen a little scheme that you can see, I think, the 8OS
Yes.
and the combination of the physical metaphor, the systems theory, and the agile approach. And the idea is really to see how you could understand the world through the body and how you can understand the abstract concepts through the body. So, for example, when you say something like resilience or adaptivity, it can sound very abstract as a word, but if you give the participants the real embodied physical experience of what resilience may be, all the different spectrums of that, then it becomes much more available on the level of reflexes. So the relationship with science, I think on one side it's to take some concepts as inspiration, because there's a lot of really interesting research that's done on the notions of robustness, resilience, what kind of structures propagate information better, and so on. But not to keep it in this abstract realm, but to then take it into the direct physical experience, try it out, and then either at least have it affect your everyday behavior, or even bring something back into the science, the new insights, the new ideas, and so on. And for instance, when I work on network theory stuff, working in that direction of research, for me, physical movement was one of the main inspirations for all the ideas which I then put into research as well. And the same happens with all other modalities, music, art, and so on.
So when you're talking about kind of transposing network theory into movement, how does that manifest itself? So I know that some of the concepts that you've talked about in this, I suppose, the open source operating system for the body mind, which is like how you've termed 8OS in some aspect. How does that apply in terms of those principles of adaptation, creation, resilience that are important?
Yeah. So if you talk about networks, one of the main things is, for example, swarm theory, that how organisms can self-organize and create very complex patterns of movement based on very simple principles. So, for example, with networks, one interesting idea that really finds a lot of applications in 8OS is this notion of the structure of the network. So for example, if it's diverse, it will be more robust and it will be slower to adjust, but then it's a more stable structure. If you want something unstable, then you make a structure of the network which is really interconnected. And really practically it means that, for example, when you work with people in a group, then you can design the kind of experiences at the EightOS sessions where they either work on their own and make small constellations very rarely for a certain period of time and then switch groups, and then they get this experience of having enough diversity that they can try all the different physicalities and taste all the different ways of moving. But if you were to create something which is really kind of like a line that people feel that they belong to the same group and it's moving somewhere, there is some sense of intensity, for example, then you make sure that there is an exercise where everyone can interact at the same time. So there is not this distinct groups, clusters, but everyone is interacting all the time. And you can actually design the experience like this. In fact, here I have an image. What we try to do in the sessions is to go in between the stages. You see in the stage number 1, we have a disconnected entity. So everyone is on their own. Then when we go to the stage 2, then people connect. And then they feel really connected. They tried already doing the exercise with everyone and so on. And then we go back into the searching new constellations, searching new groups, searching new physicalities, disconnecting, and then finding new connections again. So the network science finds its way through that, through connecting, disconnecting, and creating a certain dynamics which allows for certain moods and states to come through.
Because I know that when you're scrolling through there and I'm seeing kind of, I suppose, the various, what I understand is there's a stimulus and then there's your response to it. So whether that's an assimilation of the response, whether it's a resistance or, an alternative kind of modality, that's kind of, would it be fair to say that those would be the kind of grounding tenets somehow of this like movement system?
Yeah, for sure. This notion of resilience, for instance, is something we like to show a lot at the sessions. What happens that when you receive an impulse, for instance, what are the different ways to react, and that normally people have a tendency, or even systems, they have a tendency to tense up when something happens. We even saw it when this whole coronavirus thing was at the pinnacle, that everyone was kind of tense because no one knows what to do. So there's this first tense reaction, rigid reaction. But when you talk about resilient networks and networks that are robust, they will always have the capacity to embrace what's going on. So there is, like, even on the physical level, you have an impulse which is coming in like this. And instead of resisting, you actually accept first. So you kind of listen with your own structure what's going on around, and then it gives you the ability to respond. So in that way, it can work like that. And when we do the sessions, we also invite people to try all these different ways of responding as well.
And so I understand that, kind of, well, two questions. I have one was I was quite curious by the Eurosigns that were beside your EightOS system there and how that plays in. But I'm also curious about, and maybe this is related, how you look at these systems as kind of structures which can be viewed everywhere in the world. So you mentioned, I suppose, a kind of a state that is described by, the kind of initial reaction to the lockdown, to pandemic and a series of measures that are put in place. Can you tell us a little bit more about how your operating system of the body-mind operating system relates to larger operating systems or systems of control or capital or those elements? Because I understand that those are also important to you both in your practice in terms of what EightOS speaks to.
Yeah, it's actually one of the main elements of EightOS, this idea of how you deal with escalation and de-escalation. And if we talk about capitalism, for instance, it's based a lot on escalation, because one of the founding ideas is the constant growth. No, you have to always produce, you have to always generate, you have to grow, because all the countries, all the corporations, they borrow money, so they have to pay back more the next year, and so on. So there is this idea of constant growth, escalation. And if we then apply EightOS perspective to capitalism, the first question would be, what is our intention in this application? So for example, if I want to take advantage of the system, then I would just try to be able to predict when it's going to grow, so I can kind of game on that and, for example, make all the necessary investments and so on. On the other side, if I want to disrupt the cycle, you see an image here. So we have this kind of like manufactured anxiety cycle of capitalism, more energy, more production, even more, you know, so it's this constant growth. One of the strategies to stop that process would be to de-escalate. So for example, when you are expected to respond with more, you actually respond with less, which then of course relates to the notion of degrowth, deceleration and so on. On the other side, you could also disrupt the cycle by giving back more than the system expects, which then is very similar to the approach of accelerationism, no? That you sort of amplify the self-destructive tendencies in the system, so you bring it out of balance sooner than it would normally happen, so that you can reach the point of crisis, of the disruption, of the break, so that something new can come up. So it's basically this idea of playing, of listening, what level of escalation, de-escalation you're in, and then listening to what is your intention in relation to that. And if you're looking for some balance, then you try to de-escalate when you experience escalation. If you want to maybe disrupt it sooner and to bring it to its limit, then you escalate even more. And then you can apply it in any system that you interact with.
Okay.
Actually,
yes.
No, I say actually is also like this, the tools of Dmitry in front of this is also based of this concept. The way he was designing this software is also like trying to find like any good input to grow the concept of the software. So from art, from dance, from music, in the end for data analysis, you know. So this maybe doesn't make any sense, but for the EightOS philosophy, in the end is like the perfect, I would say, product of this way of thinking.
So, because I find it quite interesting that, you know, you refer to it as a philosophy as well, you know, so, you know, do you see EightOS as a philosophy that you are imparting to participants when they're experiencing this, or does it also dictate how you collaborate with each other in terms of your relationship or your relationship with other collaborators?
Yeah, I think our relationship is the concrete, yeah, because in the end, like the funny thing is like we from the beginning we saw like this EightOS concept as like an octopus, you know, like we took every input for and we digest this for making like a concept, a choreography, or also an album, also like planning to meet some people, traveling and stuff like this. So yeah, what we say is an operating system. You're free to come in, you're free to, to get out, but it's a way of also seeing things. It's like a filter, you know. And with this filter, you can operate some action, and this action, yeah, is interesting for us, and also for the people they participate. Also.
Yeah. And just because our screen has now flipped back to the virtual hub that you are both inhabiting as well.
Yeah.
NSDOS, do you want to maybe tell us a little bit about why you've chosen to inhabit this hub and what this space means to you and to EightOS as this practice?
Yeah, actually, with the lockdown, it was difficult to share like a physical experience, and also like to have the possibility to make music, to be creative, share information with friends, and I think this hub is like a meta atelier, a meta space for EightOS and for different projects to just like continue to think about physicality, about movement, the way to share, to move. means I mean for me means many possibilities to continue to don't feel trapped with this lockdown. We still have some freedom, and to have like this space in 3D, this 3D internet is really pretty awesome as an experience. It's just not only like a way to like the normal internet to scroll, watch video and stuff like this. They are like the 3D environment means change everything actually, and with this experience, we also like I would say like changing our way to making music, to making also different art projects together, and with other people inviting in. So yeah, it's also part of the EightOS to say, okay, we have to change all the time. We have to change our comfort zone.
Yeah,
and try to explore. In the beginning, I have to be honest with you, I was not into like VR stuff, but I was surprised to see all the possibilities, and really basic possibilities you can do inside. So rediscovering,
I think that it's been a really interesting time for lots of artists and makers who, I mean, I know from our experience as well with Block Universe that, we're normally a physical festival that happens in physical spaces. So for us, this was also a big question. And, we invited artists to approach the digital space and consider what kind of work they might like to present virtually or for people to experience. So for a lot of people, it was their first time, kind of approaching that space and considering what they'd like to present there or how to work with that when they were used to maybe holding the energy in a room and kind of holding that space. So I think it's been a really interesting time for a lot of people to experience this firsthand. And so for you as well, in this space, you've been collaborating and you've obviously created these characters as well, which are capable of moving around in the space. Is the space itself designed by EightOS?
This space is self-designed by EightOS. I would say the brother is Mozilla Hub, so it's like a really young project from people from Mozilla. I find this space by the friend from the live coding community, because it was like a lot of events, like the Russia to Mexico, and it was like a really interesting also to make a bridge of different countries. An example, like I have some friends from Kosovo, I inviting them to also perform inside the space. So there are like no limit of frontier. In the end, this is why also I wanted to cultivate, because I had the chance to work with different countries. And my dream was also like to connect people from Brazil to Kosovo to Tokyo and see what we can do together without, care about like this problem of frontier. So it's pretty interesting also of decentralize also like I would say the megalopole and stuff like this to find our proper colony, and create something and facilitate like the communication between communities and be creative.
It's amazing. And so you also talked about creating music in this space, and I suppose I'm really curious because I guess in many ways with the usual physical events that happen, it's very much about imparting that somatic or embodied experience to participants. In a space like this, it's obviously kind of you're focusing a lot more, and maybe it's much more visible, the relationship that EightOS has with technology and music as well. So can you speak a bit more about that side of things? Because I know both of you also have very strong music backgrounds, which we haven't necessarily touched on. So how does the sonic component figure in your practice?
Dmitry, you want to...
Yeah, we actually can show it on the screen, because here, if we add it to the screen, I will just put up the volume so we can still talk. Can you hear something?
Yes.
Yeah, so basically this is an example of us playing music while being in this virtual space. And also this is one interesting aspect that I would like to add to what Kul said earlier, that for me, for instance, this virtual world, one of the interesting elements is that it allows you to to exist simultaneously in multiple dimensions, and you really have this feeling that you are there, but you're also here. You also have another channel of communication, maybe through a sound link, so you have that reality. You have your body, your corporeal reality, which is like a different thing, and you're exposed to all these multiple realities at the same time, and it becomes such an interesting feeling. Like the sense of that is really special, because you realize that all of these things, they are actually connected, and also confusing as well, and it's also very new, and it also doesn't always work really well. So it kind of introduces this idea of like, if we have 8OS, then there is also bug-OS, like the operating system which is making bugs into our operating system, but in such an interesting way that allows us also to actually be creative and to respond to it based on our approach, and to challenge also our approach and to see how it works. So for example, right now you see an excerpt of what we recorded earlier where we played music in the hubs. Right now on the screen you see the software called Orca, which Ku is using, which is making sound from code. So it's a really great tool. And then I'm using software which we were working on with Ku called Infranodus, which actually is a funny story too, because it started as a network analysis tool, and then so it was like a purely scientific tool. As you can see, it visualizes text as a network and shows the connections between the words. So then you can gradually build a structure of the meaning and see what are the main topics inside, how they're connected, and what is not visible that you could reveal from any text. But then Ku called me up and he said, look, let's use it to make music also. And this was a really strange idea, something that no normal scientific software would do. But as we were doing stuff together, I thought, okay, let's try. And he kind of like led this approach of turning it into a musical instrument. So now it's a really funny tool because it's used by scientists, but at the same time it can be used by musicians to make music. So it's like an undercover synth in a way, you know? And in this session, which you see right now on the screen, we actually combined all those tools together. So we combined the VR hub as a kind of like main focal point of the experience. Then I'm playing Infranodus that you see right now on the screen, just writing text and creating sound. And then Ku is playing also with Orca, as you can see now here, which is also using text a lot as like the input data. And then at some points, for instance, then I will show you a little bit later in the video. Then when he creates some kind of pattern in Orca, and then I create some musical pattern. And in Infranodus, the music is playing, and then he puts on his VR glasses, and then he goes into the VR, and then he starts moving, and this in turn is influenced by the music as well, you know? So this is how...
Incredible. And in terms of the text that you're using, what are the words that are like kind of generating all of this information that's being processed?
Yeah, so here I was kind of writing, it was really like a flow of consciousness. I was just listening and looking at what's going on, and you see I'm writing the text and it visualizes it. So it's kind of like what I felt on the moment. But we have another version of that where we took the molecule of coronavirus, the DNA of that actually, and visualized it as a network. So we also played coronavirus DNA as well.
Wow.
And maybe this made us immune to it. I don't know, but.
Well, I'm curious because, you know, you talked about, I suppose, kind of that stream of consciousness writing that you're doing, and yeah, I like this kind of, maybe it's your protector from coronavirus. But you know, how does the like intuitive how does that sit within all of these systems, which normally have, I guess, quite logical modes of operating? How does like the intuitive, or that I guess somehow it's almost like a metaphysical quality of an experience. How does that sit within the structures that you have created to operate within?
Yeah, this is a very good
Is
question.
that something that you consider, or yeah?
Yeah, for sure. Because in fact, what I noticed when I was working on this software is when you visualize any text, if it's a coherent text, it makes a very interconnected structure. But as soon as you start working with poetry, it becomes a totally different structure. Actually, it starts to consist of a lot of disconnected islands. So, for example, when you see right now these interconnected clusters, for me, poetry is something that connects the gaps. So we have these interconnected structures, which is what seems meaningful to us. But this kind of free flow of consciousness, poetry, imagination, creation is when we fill in those gaps which have not yet been connected together. And this is why sometimes it might sound strange and sometimes it might sound weird. But most of the time we will have an emotional response to it because our mind cannot comprehend it. And so by making this jump from one structure to another, we're actually creating some kind of sensory experience, let's say.
But Dmitry, I think it's also what we do also with EightOS in general. It's like kind of like this poetic aspect of including like fighting, dance, and hacking, and technology and science in the end. We go somewhere because we have like this kind of love with the aesthetic, with the also I would say the tools, and in the end we create like a narrative around this, and we find like logic results in the end. Almost by surprise or by mistake. So this is also like an exploration also with the tools, with the environment, with the studio. So in the end, for me, is also like a poetic, I would say, movement.
Well, it's interesting because I suppose when you're looking at all of these different elements, like, and I suppose even the kind of the intuitive movement that you practice, like as you can see on the screen, it's kind of one of the sessions where you're exploring that relationship to each other. I suppose in some ways it's almost like the chaos of nature, but of course, as we know, there is really no chaos in nature. I mean, everything, it has patterns and systems and right down to the fractals, I guess, of nature that all feeds in. I'm curious. Well, there's two elements here that NSDOS, I know also that you spent some time in the ArtSec. This is a bit of a tangent, but recording sounds. And I'm curious, does any of that practice also feed into these systems in EightOS, which is your collaborative practice, or?
Totally. I went to Alaska just after my first workshop in Russia, actually. And it was like a really nice inspiration because our instructor was also like all like military from Spetsnaz, from the special force. So also like explaining a lot of techniques inside the nature and stuff like this. So I took all this, like for me it was like a poetic tools, for my album in Alaska. So trying to also understand what it means like to be in nature and analyze like my surrounding, And in the end, I came with this idea to use video tracking and translate this into music. So in the end, normally, like I say normally, it's not normally, but the movement of feed recording is more like record the sound in nature and make the harmony with this or tell a story. But I wanted to also like find another way with another tools, other system, and tell the same story actually. So about what we say from the beginning, translating like information to another, and try to hack principle. So yeah, in the end, like the stress to be in the nature because you don't know if you are the bear or not, like also take all the material with me as a super fragile material. Also, you have to be inside this state where you know what you do. Each movement, you have to be conscious, but at the same time, I was looking for the chaos you were talking about before, Even for me, chaos doesn't exist. I'm pretty much like you, but I like to call this chaos also.
But it's the poetic. It's the poetic, right? It's those mental leaps in connectivity somehow. Yeah.
But I had like a strange result, and this is also part of the EightOS trance. I call this EightOS trance because it's the moment where you don't know exactly what you do, but everything is fluid. I was filming like waterfall. And this waterfall, I was putting this in my video tracking. All the pixel was like giving data to my music system, and I mapped like a free jazz instrument, like trumpet, drum, piano, bass, and stuff like this. And in the end, I had like a free jazz music sequence, and I was like, okay, wow, it's like a free jazz in nature. They're like something like talking each other. Even people didn't make the bridge before, but I was like, like, wow, this is amazing. This is pretty much what we try to find with EightOS is like some relationship with some stuff doesn't really make sense really, but in the end they can talk each other, and I'm really believe about like if we continue to dig on it, like when you have like a software for science, an example, and this is really difficult even for me because my English is not so good, and if I want to talk with like people from science is really hardcore. But if I have the tools to operate with them, and because maybe they use like a language, I use my music language, and we can do the same stuff. This is what we're looking for. So like trying to make like a complex language, but I would say light enough to have like to cross barrier, to cross platform.
Well, it's interesting because I know because that album you made in the Arctic was called Intuition as well, wasn't it? So I think like I find it very, very interesting about kind of making those leaps and connections with science, because I don't know, I'm always fascinated as well by scientific theories are really, they're leaps in consciousness, or it's like it's a vision of something that someone has, and then they kind of need to create a system that proves it, right? So it's like I don't know, it's like an interesting roundabout way of working. So I'm really curious as well. I mean, it sounds like this this period has really this period of lockdown has really propelled your work into a new direction, or maybe it's like deepened one aspect of it, because as we can see here on the video as well, this is the Impale de Tokyo, is that right? The event that you did there. So it's your individual work, and it's you sharing it with participants. I'm very curious to hear about how this this shift in your practice has really influenced where you'll go next. I mean, as someone who also works with performance and the live and bringing people together, it's something that I've been talking a lot about and debating is how those things can exist in the future when we may still be experiencing social distancing and there may be restrictions on people gathering together, or organizing events that require human connection and connectivity. How do you see kind of what the evolutions that have taken place in your practice over the last few months? How do you see that evolving going forward into this potentially unknown state that we might be existing in for some time? And how does also it affect your collaboration if one of you is in Paris and one is in Berlin, and maybe any restrictions on physically being together also?
The funny things, I think we've been prepared for this kind of like situation. This is why our tools is like about communication, and we InfraNodus is a way also to have like a kind of like co-op working, so we can like influence each other in the same like software, and we can like give different information. But for the future, I think VR is going to be like the interesting platform. We also see like Zoom and everything, tools like this, but maybe it's going to have also like some like unexpected way of talking, unexpected tools. Because I was not ready for an example, all this TikTok, Zoom, and all this software. They was like really booming, it was booming, like so people maybe they wanted to move, so maybe something related to movement. Also maybe also like I see the frustration in example in Paris just after the lockdown, people were starting to do like a lot of protests. So maybe gonna have also like maybe some new application being hacked to facilitate some protest also can be possible. All these streaming platform, podcast and stuff like this is also interesting. But I'm more worried about like clubbing and all this entertaining situation people they need. How is
Yeah,
that,
I'm also quite like concerned about that because I feel like in London in particular, there's a lot of artists who work with performance that really come. I mean, I think there's a lot of really generative work and connection and like-minded communities being formed in like in nightclubs, like in that space. So, and Dmitry, I know actually that was also a little bit of how you started out in Berlin as well, as organizing these performative nights, right? Like club nights and gatherings.
Yeah, I think it's true that it's going to be affected a lot. Actually, during the lockdown, I also had to fight a little bit with this idea that everything has to shift online. And on the one side, I saw that it makes one inventive because, for instance, we did something like practicing outside in groups, but using walkie-talkies with the headset. With the social distancing, so you have a group of people in space, but they're actually disconnected. But at the same time, of course, it's really beautiful to actually be able to have contact with people, and a lot of our work is about that. So I think it would not go away because there will still be people who would be willing to practice physically.
Oh, yes.
But of course, now we have to embrace also a little bit like this new reality and invent different tools that would enable us to have like a similar kind of experience online. And for me, it was really interesting, for instance, when we did sessions online of EightOS, that at the beginning it seemed really alienating, but the feeling was really great because we had people from Italy, from Russia, from England, from the US, all at the same time on the screen, and we're transferring this physicality to each other. Even in the session, we use a lot the screen, so you see some other person moving and you get inspiration from how they move, and you try to copy and paste that movement into your system, which is what we normally do anyway in the physical sessions. But on the screen, it's great because you imagine that someone moved in London and that movement transferred to Moscow, and from Moscow it went to Italy, and then it went to Berlin, and then it went to Paris, and you have this kind of resonance, but through these digital tools, and this was really, really impressive. And I think to kind of try to work in this direction, to accept the limitations, to see what we can do with them, and at the same time also not to let go of the physical aspect, but to just augment both experiences. This is going to be, I think, the evolution, and also thinking of the different software tools which we could make, for instance, for wearable devices, that you would be able to receive some impulses from other participants through sound as well. Like this actually really heightens the importance of sound, because through sound you can communicate the dynamics, the emotions, and so on. So I think it's going to be a really interesting development where we will actually try to keep both and to develop them further.
Yeah, and also, there are like really interesting stuff with, an example, this VR hub we was experiencing before. We had like many possibility to use like VR hubs, but this one was interesting because it was just about like aesthetic. It was about interaction between people, And this I like the idea because, in example, with all the fashion masks we have, in example, it was this problematic about like, you have to have like this kind of validation from the state to have a mask, In the end, it doesn't matter, So this is what I like also, like to imagine we have like all this technology with the really low tech. Maybe we can do something amazing, This is what I think is gonna happen after, Unexpected technology, maybe something we forget, and come back on the market again,
Yeah. And I'm curious, just because you referenced the mask there as well, and obviously kind of all of these systems. I saw that you have an upcoming workshop called Somacognitive Immunity. I wondered if you might briefly tell me a little bit about that before we close out our session.
Yeah, so this is really based on the idea of networks, what we talked about earlier, and the research from network science, which basically says that a network that is immune is a network that has a certain level of diversity and variability inside, which is quite also common sense, because in the end, if you have, let's say, a group of people and everyone is really interconnected, it's very easy for this constellation of people to get infected with a certain idea or a fad, a mind virus, and so on. And what we try to do in the session is to create a physical practice in the frame of this workshop, where on the one side people would experience what it's like to build temporary constellations, which that they would then allow to then break apart and to be able to build the new ones on the one side. So this kind of idea of social diversity, how you can become the center of a group, stay there for a while, and then go to the periphery, leave the space to somebody else, then join another group and another constellation, and so on. So this kind of social dynamics makes any social group much more immune to whatever it would be. Either it's a disease or some mind virus or an infection from the outside, both literal and virtual one. And then at the same time, the idea of variability, because when you have a dynamical system which is always in the same rhythm, it's very susceptible to some unexpected impulses from the outside. But when you have a system which is always having a different speed, so for example, it moves slow and then fast, and then it's with a lot of intensity, and then it's relaxed. And as soon as you have this diversity in the dynamics of movement, this also makes you very adaptive and responsive to the environment, because you can basically react to anything that happens. So we try to combine this both, variability and this social diversity, and create a physical and virtual experience where the participants would be able to experience that and to practice that.
Nice. Well, yeah, I mean, that sounds amazing. I would encourage anyone listening to go to your website and sign up for that. It sounds like an incredible thing to experience, because I think it would be so amazing for people to be able to, have that kind of, if not physical, somehow like virtual experience as well of your practice and all of the things that we've talked about. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you both. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation and hearing more about your practice and all the things that you've been working on over the last few months as well, in kind of this strange time that we've been living through. But yeah, thank you so much. Thank you also, Tadeo of Mutant Promise, who's organized this event and coordinated us all together. And also Eleanor at Somerset House, who's been manning the technology for us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.